My name is Nicole Rogerson. I'm the CEO of Autism Australia, and I want to welcome everybody here today. The numbers are quite big for today, so thank you for joining us for those who are watching live. And for those who sensibly registered will be getting this video a little bit later and they can watch it at their leisure. Welcome everyone. As I say, I want to really thank and recognise our sponsor for today, which is Mabel. Mabel's an online platform where people looking for disability support connect with local independent support workers. For those of you who have been around autism awareness for a while, you will know Mabel is a long-time partner of ours. So we have a deep commitment to the brand colour of orange, and that's why we hang out together so much. But they're a great organisation and we really appreciate them supporting this webinar. And I should say, welcome Libby Ellis. Welcome, Libby.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. And I should introduce Libby to everybody. Libby is the brains behind this particular webinar. She is the lead consultant of Mabel's Home and Living Consultants. The service provides personalised guidance and support to NDIS participants and families to achieve their version of home. This is a complex area of the NDIS, and the service helps people navigate that. Importantly, Libby's brother is an NDIS participant, so there's lots of lived experience here. He has a significant intellectual disability and he's autistic and he doesn't speak, but he's always communicating. So I'm going to be interested in asking you about that, Libby. You guys have helped move him from institutional and group home care a number of years ago, and his model of support combines personalised support worker teams together with non-disabled people who are his supportive housemates. I'm keen to dive into that, but that will give everybody just an overview of Libby's experience and what she brings here today. So welcome, Libby.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right, to kick us off, when people, we were talking about this earlier, when people start to think about independent living, and for a lot of people that are on this webinar, I'm imagining a lot of them are people probably like me who are parents of adults or maybe teenagers or young ones if you're really planning ahead. What is the thing that usually gets people thinking about independent living?
Yeah, in our experience, we've found kind of three common triggers. They're normally reactive. So you and I were chatting a bit earlier about moving from kind of reactive to proactive thinking, which we can also talk about. But it's usually something like parents are getting older, or they face a health issue. So some things like really come front to mind, front of experience in the situation. The second one is like the person themselves stating, their own desire for greater independence, or they may be feeling like overloaded in shared family environments. They kind of want something more for themselves and are starting to say that or communicate that. And the third is like the person has to move. So I've got to kind of get out from where I am and find somewhere else to live. So yeah, they're typically reactive reasons. So I think sort of thinking about what's the best way to get started, it is actually to think about starting as soon as possible. The time is now, even if there isn't a big issue looming. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that NDIS planning, I'm sure everybody joining this webinar already knows this, but NDIS planning takes time. So what we've found often in the service is that people might not have a plan, so they might have a new goal or a new thing that they need to have happen in their life, like a change of living situation, but you don't yet have a plan that is going to enable all of that. So for example, a plan that would enable you to get all the assessments that you need done. So you may need to then achieve that plan in order to move to the first stage of the changing living.
Yeah, and I see your point about, and I should just mention, I didn't before we dived in, is everybody, the Q&A is open, so please by all means ask questions in there. We're really lucky that Mabel has provided Ryan and Kim. You can't see them, but they're in the background today answering any of your questions in the Q&A. So Try and keep them a little bit general. I mean, I don't go too far down into the weeds of your personal situation, because you can just call Mabel and have a chat with them at any time if you want to do that. But the chat is open and the Q&A is open, so we encourage everyone to do that. Yeah, Libby, you make that really good point about being reactive. We had a call this week that was desperately sad from a sibling whose elderly parent had all of a sudden died, and their autistic sibling had been living at home with mum, and the death was quite sudden, and the family were really scrambling. So that sounds a little morbid, but let's face it, as parents, we're all getting older. So I think what I hear you're saying is, don't wait until something terrible happens. Try and get started with this, even if you don't think, living and changing the living is immediate. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So your story perfectly illustrates that, like, planning without urgency allows you to stay in control of the process. It allows you to do things like think about this in stages. So I was thinking about somebody we're supporting at the moment, Gina, a young woman. In her next plan, she still wants to live with her parents, but she said, I want to move out in the next couple of years. So rather than waiting for that next couple of years, what could happen in the next plan that helps take the next step? So also chunking it down and thinking about it in stages, and getting started without urgency. Yeah, are the two main messages. I know that's difficult. It's so difficult to think about when life and the NDIS just gives us like endless to-do lists, and so something that isn't urgent, it's just so hard to get to. If it doesn't need to be done today or this week, it becomes really difficult to it kind of slips down the line.
So
But
why don't we,
absolutely,
what are the first steps, Libby? Like, because I agree, if people are going to feel overwhelmed by it, let's give them some guidance on how do you begin so
okay,
that it becomes less overwhelming.
yeah. So I think there's four really excellent steps that people can do, families, or if you're organising your own living situation yourself as an autistic adult or autistic young person, you could do yourself. And the theme here is to start by shaping a vision, shaping your preferences, shaping what you think would work for you before even looking at the NDIS funding buckets. So pretty much everyone I've ever met has got thoughts about things like, what would I want my home to be like? Do I need any special features in my home that make life easier for me? What doesn't work for me? What does work for me? Even in support, like what kinds of people and things make life better for me? What kinds of things just don't work for me? What works in my environment? What doesn't? What happens for me overnight? What keeps me safe? These are all questions that people have answers to. I think so. So starting this vision, this what is it that's going to work for me, is a great first step. I think parents can also start to identify those invisible supports. So something we do in the consultancy, but you could also do with others or with yourself, is to just start to map out day by day, starting a log of all of the things that I do that nobody else knows the hell that I do these things that make life tick over. All those background and invisible supports, because when the person moves, those supports are going to need to be provided by something or someone. So what are they? Listing those out.
And is this hard for parents because sometimes they don't realize the supports they're doing? Like, yeah,
They're just like, they're the things that I've always done. They're what I know to do to make life work.
yeah.
So making those conscious is a really great first step as well. And I think lastly, there's no better thing to do than to meet peers who have gone before you to look at examples and stories. And it's again, that's something that we do in the consultancies. We spend time linking people with others, showing them. I think Kim's going to share some of those now, so that you can start to look at live examples and say, oh, that would work for me, or that wouldn't work for me. Yeah, so talking to people and saying, how did you do it? How are you doing it? what
Yeah.
is just a great first step.
So I think you're really saying it's important to start with a vision of what a good life could be before you dive into, the paperwork, before you dive into the bureaucracy of it, or a funding stream. You're not getting boxed into a funding stream. Is that kind of the big sort of macro view you need to take?
I think it is, and it's also the most important first step. So I think of it in kind of three stages: vision, then what would be the NDIS pathway or funding process that might match or might help facilitate that vision, and then what evidence, what do I need to bring together to demonstrate to the scheme that I'm eligible, or that's the pathway, for me. And I use the word vision. I did want to say to you, Nicole, that I guess I want to acknowledge that we are in a housing crisis, and that there are systemic barriers to affordable and accessible housing that we can't really solve individually here. So it sort of makes it a bit funny to talk about vision, but it's really important because it's about control. It's about what are the non-negotiables that are actually going to work for me and not work for me.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of have to park some of that and say, I can't solve Australia's housing problem, but I do need to solve my family's.
That's right. And so the funding, so I mean, I get it. You go to the lots of professionals in the NDIS start in that area. Well, what funding is available? They start with the acronyms SIL, ILO, or SDA. Those are really important. Actually, they're critical. But first, those places you're not gonna find a descriptor of your model. So funding is absolutely an enabler, and we're going to need to understand those operational guidelines, those NDIS funding pathways. We're going to need to understand them well. But in the beginning, yes, they can get in the way because they're not a descriptor of what's possible for you. They're an enabler. They're not your model. You're not going to read the guidelines and discover your model.
Yeah,
Work
Libby,
for you.
let me jump in there because somebody's asked the question and they've preempted me because it was on my list. But a lot of people, myself included, hear all the acronyms like SDA, SIL, ILO. You guys, they roll off your tongue because you're so used to them. Can you give us a quick overview of what those things are? So for people who are really new to it, they know what code you're talking.
I can, Nick. Are you gonna? Yeah, really quick. I'll give it a go. If anybody can explain it really quick,
Okay, we'll do.
I get a prize. I get a prize if I can. If
I
I
should
can
have
do
had
it in plain English.
I should have had a visual.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those acronyms. So the first one is that you might have heard of is SDA. That stands for Specialist Disability Accommodation. So SDA, if you think about the funding, there's housing and there's support. So SDA is about funding housing, and it's the only funding that the NDIS gives for bricks and mortar. So most NDIS participants are going to need to source their housing the way every Australian does. So that is social, public housing, private housing like private rental, or home ownership. This is the way that Australians get a home. Most NDIS participants will have to figure that out, but there are a proportion of people who are eligible for having their housing paid for from their NDIS plan, and that's what specialist disability accommodation is. So it's for people who need special, highly accessible features in their home, and they also need a lot of support to live in their home. And the NDIS calls that group of people with an extreme functional impairment, and very high support needs. So if you're sitting there thinking, is SDA for me? You might think about it, yes, do I need highly accessible housing? Do I need a specialist home that might be designed to reduce risk, almost like the home is an extension of my support team. So there is a category in SDA called robust housing, and it's designed for people where they may have behaviours of concern or things that may put themselves or others at risk. So the house actually is designed to help people address that and help people regulate and be safer in it.
And do the NDIS determine that, Libby? That obviously you'd have to have an awful amount of supporting paperwork to show that your child fit into that category, but ultimately the decision's up to them.
Yes, it is.
Yep. Okay.
The NDIS determines that eligibility. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the bricks and mortar part. That's the SDA part.
Yeah.
What about the SIL part? I take that's the supported part. Yeah.
Yeah, so then there's the support that you need in your home, and that might come from sort of three main areas in your NDIS plan. So one is called supported independent living, or SIL. There's also ILO, or individualized living options, and then there's core support, a flexible core budget. So SIL, very interestingly, SIL is about funding for in-home support. It's not a type of housing. So actually it can be provided in many different living arrangements. It could be provided in your rental property, in a home that you own or that you live in with your partner, or it could be provided in shared supported accommodation with other NDIS participants. So it gets a bit confusing because that funding, people receive funding in shared supported accommodation, but that's really just one option. It can be provided in a range of housing options. And SIL is for people who need very high levels of support from another person, such like a support worker. And that's typically defined as more than 8 hours of self-care or household support across a 24-hour period.
Okay.
That includes needing support overnight.
Okay.
So that's for people, who need a lot of support across the day and night. ILO, individualised living options, again, are about support in your home, but through other kinds of relationships than just paid support. So SIL is like a kind of a rostered support model, but ILO might support other kinds of relationships. You just introduced my brother as an example. His model includes paid support workers, but it also includes non-disabled people who live in his home and provide him with overnight support and safety, for example.
And Libby, can I just interject and ask you, how did you find those people? What was the secret sauce? Because I bet there's lots of people saying, well, that sounds really quite appealing.
Yeah, so and just, not the only one who lives like this. As we can see, the NDIS has now got a funding stream for it. It's called ILO. So there's lots of different ways that people might live with others or connected to others who provide them with support but aren't support workers. So we have found, and others find, those kinds of people through their networks. They might find it through advertising. So it's similar to thinking about how you might find a support worker on Mabel, for example. You can create a profile, post a job, do a meet and greet, review verified people. So it's a similar process. I don't know who the person is yet, but I'm going to go to places, go to platforms, flatmate platforms, in my network.
Yeah, so like anyone else would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would absolutely want to have the same sort of like safety, you'd want to have the same, think about, the safety, who is this person? Might be a stranger in my life at the moment, but how am I going to know that they're the right person? So there's a whole process to thinking about that before somebody just moves into your home.
Yeah, sure.
I want to do a lot of planning around that and set it up. maybe have a trial period, all sorts of things that we can think about that help people figure out if this is the right relationship for me.
So, what are some of the sort of red flags to avoid when choosing a housing support arrangement? Because whether it be SDA, whether it be CEL, whether it be ILO, different people on this webinar are going to be thinking, one might relate to them a little bit more. But are there kind of universal red flags that families should be aware of?
Yes, there are. So I might start with the green flags because the red flags are kind of the opposite, obviously the opposite of that. So the main one is what we would call the separation of housing and support. This is about having choice, flexibility, and security in your living arrangement. So the first green flag is that there is security in the living arrangement. That is that the person can't be moved from the home by somebody else,
Yeah.
by a service, for example, without their approval. So who owns the home and who's providing the support are really important questions to ask when you're looking at options. And I would suggest, so you want to have the ability to change your support without losing your home,
Yeah.
vice versa. So that's the red. I would say that's one of the main red flags.
It's such an important
Where those things,
separation, Libby. Like it is it now a rule within the NDIS that those things have to be separate? Because I can't think of a world where the person supporting you should be also in control of your housing. That feels like a conflict that could go wrong.
it's highly advised.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And where a person has SDA, yes, their support provider should be different to to their SDA provider.
Yeah, fair enough.
But that's not the case in all situations. So yes, where housing and support are tied together, it can really reduce a person's choice and control. So I think that the other kind of green flags is that they're around choice and flexibility is that support hasn't been designed before you show up, so you don't enter into where all of there's a kind of a risk assessment or something that's been designed for a whole bunch of other people but hasn't really taken your needs into account. So personalization, collaboration with you, and home should always be a place where you experience growth, where life gets better, where life doesn't get more restrictive. Those are the things. So if you're feeling like that the other way is happening, then those are the red flags.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think those red flags lean into the worry that people have, and I think probably most parents, I can see through some of the questions, people are very nervous about what safe and supported looks like, particularly for those parents of children with high support needs and profound autism. The idea that anybody can watch over, take care of, support this individual the way our family can feels really nervous. But what does safe and supported look like in practice? Especially, I'm particularly talking about for those people who need 24/7 care or close to it.
Mm. Well, first I want to acknowledge, Nick, that that's exactly right. And families, so I am not, so this comes from, personal experience as well as experience with many families, that it is right to be, it's okay to be nervous and worried. It's actually, if we channel it well, it can become part of the process because what those things do is signify to us inside you. It's like this is where my person might be unsafe. The thing that I'm worried about most is a signal for risk and vulnerability. So if we can actually kind of just not sit with this is what stops lots of families, I think, from moving forward, is you just get so worried about it. It's hard to imagine how your person might be safe if you're not around, all the time. So safe and supported could start with, I think it's a highly personalised definition, but it could start with articulating those worries. Like,
Yeah.
again, it's a process we use in our service. I call it the what if. What if this happened? What if that happened? What am I most worried about? You can do it for yourself, or you can do it if you're thinking about a family member. And it's the first thing it is just a brain dump of everything that's kind of stopping me from moving forward with this what if. And it could be, what as simple as what if my person loses their key and or forgets their code to the house and can't get back in, or what if the housemate that we agree on isn't the right person and they leave, or what if this. So you just write them down, and
That's a
then
great idea about writing them down because there's no point in pretending like, there's no point in wishful thinking. You might as well write them down, particularly when you know your child and you know they're likely to do X, Y, and Z. And I presume when people come to talk to you, Libby, you want to go through that with them so that, everybody's not just glossing over it. We're quite aware of where the risks are and we're mitigating those. Is that right?
no, because that becomes part of what is the answer to what is safe and supported. So your
Yeah.
question is
Okay.
what is safe and supported. And we can define, people can start to define that for
Yeah.
themselves. And it becomes part of, so what would we need to put in place in the support model that either was could prevent that risk from happening, or if it did happen, what could we do at the time if somebody did lose their code to the house? What support would be needed at that time? So it's absolutely part of the planning and part of the support that's required. But overall, I would say that what keeps people safe, fortunately and unfortunately, the Disability Royal Commission really helped us to understand that. And what we could see through that is that people are less safe when they're in segregated or closed systems, when there are fewer independent eyes on people. So, inclusion, relationship, having more people who know you, these are natural checks that keep people safer. And secondly, I would say being in control of your home, as we talked about before, is like absolutely a fundamental safeguard. So when you can control your environment, when you're as close as possible to, when you have rights and obligations, you're a tenant, you're a homeowner, you're in a shared housing arrangement that has an agreement with the landlord. Those kinds of things are what keeps, having control, as much control as possible over the housing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think a trusted your team. So there's lots that we know or that people know about what keeps them safe and supported. But then if with you have a trusted team, your OT, your behaviour support practitioner, if they're trusted people, they can also help you to identify things that you might not have thought of before. Again, because you just live the life that you do, and maybe there are risks and safeguards that you should really consider.
It's a team. It sounds, you're describing a team to me. That's what it feels like. Libby's asked about evidence, getting the right evidence. What kinds of information, reports, professional input is the most useful for families to start preparing if they're going to do an NDIS home and living application? And Libby's specifically asking, what's the most effective thing to make sure you get, say, one-on-one funding and not one-on-three funding? Because I imagine that the NDIS might make some of these decisions in an arbitrary way. I mean, give me an overview on that information you need to collect.
Well, the first thing is that you'd need a goal. You'd need a goal about changing or a changed living situation. So that signifies to the scheme that something's different. You've been tracking along like this, and now something needs to change. So the goal is the way to do that. After that, you will need to demonstrate eligibility for different funding types. So SDA, SIL, and ILO, they all have different eligibility criteria, as well as being an NDIS support and being reasonable and necessary. So you find those in the operational guidelines. So
I think Kim and Ryan are going to be putting these links in the chat. The other thing is call Mabel later. But yeah, we'll make sure we get as much of this information there as possible.
overall, so maybe to give a little bit more specific information, overall, you're going to need to show your daily support and housing needs. So you're going to need to describe across a 24-hour period, it could be in 1 hour blocks, it could even be in 30-minute blocks. What are the supports, particularly if you need support from a person? In those times, you're going to need to outline that very, very clearly. And that's irrespective of whether the support is provided by, currently provided by informal supports like families, whether it's provided by nobody and it's a big gap in the person's life, or whether it is provided by formal supports or support workers. You're going to need, so how often and when you need support each day, really clearly outlined. You're going to need to show risks and recommended safeguards. You're going to need to demonstrate your functional capacity and the impact of that on your daily life and housing needs. So that's why at the moment the process involves a functional capacity assessment that's kind of how home and living specific.
Okay, and I'm reliably told I'm getting it wrong about the chat, but the email that comes out with the recording of this video will have links involved for those who don't get your question answered in the Q&A. We'll have all of these links in the email that goes out if you're registered today, so that will help. Yeah, Libby, finally, because there's so much here, and this is a really emotional time for families because you've usually put it off. The aforementioned, we think our child's better off with us, or being terribly, terribly worried about it. What's kind of, to wrap it up, what is the single piece of advice that you could kind of give parents at this point who are managing this time?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I think it's about that vision piece. So it's like if you don't lead with your vision, others may lead with their assumptions. So it's never too early then to start really detailing what is going to work for you or for the person in their living situation, what would work best, because unfortunately there's such misinformation and so many assumptions still around. So for example, the assumption that the only independent living options in the NDIS are like living alone with drop-in support and perhaps being a bit lonely and vulnerable, or living in a group home. Maybe people feel there's only two choices, that you can only live with other people with disability, that you can't ever be on your own, that you always need somebody to help you with activities. These are all assumptions that other people in the sector might hold, and so if we're not clear, then their beliefs might kind of trump what's actually right for the person.
Oh, it does. I think it's the misinformation, but it's also it's the wording around some of these rules, SDA, SIL, people throw them around, but if you're not working in the sector, they do feel a bit overwhelming.
Absolutely. So again, that's why we start with what I call that vision piece, because that can act as such a good guide for then with your team. So all of those allied health professionals that might be, when we were talking about the evidence before, you can see therefore that an OT or a speech pathologist or a behaviour support practitioner might be needed to demonstrate those things in your life. If we can help guide and shape what those people are, what are they assessing, what are we aiming for here that they can help support through their assessments and reports. That's what I think has works best. Yeah.
I think the other thing you talked about, Libby, is the fact that people can actually come to you and make an appointment and come and have a chat with you. I feel very nervous in saying that because there are 500 odd people registered for this event, but am I wrong in saying it's okay for people to contact you?
Of course, people can. I think we can put a link into the chat.
Yeah.
And inquire about our service, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I just think it's nice to. I'm seeing a couple of the questions people are kind of asking similar themes, which is what does good look like? So I think what good looks like is different for different people and different families. But by hearing examples like that of your brother and how different things can be put together, I think gives people permission to start thinking how they would make it work. Because it is very different depending on which city you are. We've got people from all around the country joining us today. So what is possible in Sydney and what is possible in Hobart, you know, there could be really very different depending on the housing market you're in as well.
They could. So again, we need to acknowledge the housing strain in Australia.
Yeah.
I guess I do find that people, yeah, what we want for ourselves are very, or generally very ordinary things. They're the same that every Australian wants for themselves in terms of housing security. So, what good looks like, I think we've actually got a resource that describes what good looks like in housing and support. It was a great piece of research that was done on around 130 people. And it said those things that I mentioned before. Good looks like where people have security in their living arrangement. They're not just going to be turfed, where they have genuine choice and control over who provides them with support in their home when that happens. Who is it that's turning up at my door? Those kinds of things are crucial. That you have an opportunity to grow, that life gets better, it doesn't get more restrictive. These are the kinds of things that mark what good looks like in home and living support.
I think that's nice. I like that idea of it gets better and your life can be bigger. It doesn't become restricted in that sort of group home setting. I know Lida is asking the question, what is improved livability in SDA homes for people with ASD? I mean, that's got to be taken into consideration when we think about the right, what does good look like for this person? Because for people with autism, they will have specific needs and supports that that other people with physical disabilities may not have. So it's no one size fits all, as that's what I'm hearing from you. Is that right, Libby?
That's right. So the improved, so yes, there is robust housing and there's improved livability SDA housing. So improved livability is designed, yeah, so you've got to kind of demonstrate that the design features of improved livability are something that you need, would benefit you and would help you to become more independent in life. Um, so yes, people, autistic adults, people with intellectual disability, though often benefit from an improved livability designed home.
Yeah, I'll bet they do. Well, Libby, we've run over time a bit. I want to thank you so much today for giving us all of your insights, and I really appreciate Mabel making today possible and making you available to us. It's fantastic. As I say to everybody, if you're getting this recording, we'll make sure the email has all the links of all the things that Libby spoke about today for the questions we couldn't get to. It's a really complex area, but I can assure the Autism Australia audience is that we're going to be covering the housing topic in multiple different ways this year because all the questions can't be answered in a quick webinar, but we understand, or maybe I'm just a bit sensitive about it because I'm aging myself, but we've got lots of our followers who are parents of older children, teenagers and adults who really need this situation solved for their family. So we'll very much focus on it. And Libby, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. And thank you to Ryan and Kim for being in the background answering everybody's questions. We'll make sure we get those links out to everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
thanks, Libby. See you. Everybody have a great Thursday. Bye.